What separates a good anime from a great anime? Why do some animes stick with us long after we've watched it? Welcome to the workshop.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Kris.
We're two friends from high school and now aspiring writers, and in this podcast, we discuss and deconstruct storytelling elements in some of our favorite animes. Today in the workshop, we'll be talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender. Yes. So specifically, we will just be focusing on Book 1, or Season 1, which premiered on Nickelodeon in 2005. If you haven't watched Avatar yet, first of all, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
But if you haven't, we do highly, highly recommend that you give it a watch first before coming back and listening to our analysis, which will be full of lovely spoilers.
So, the show takes place in a world where people called benders have the ability to control one of four elements: air, water, fire, or earth, and the Avatar has the unique ability to control all four elements. The current Avatar is an airbender named Aang who has been missing for 100 years, and when he's discovered frozen in an iceberg by Katara and her brother Sokka in the South Pole, Aang wakes up to find that in the century he's been gone, the Fire Nation has waged war with the rest of the world. The first season of the show follows Aang, Katara, and Sokka as they journey to the Northern Water Tribe in order to find a waterbender so that Aang can start mastering the four elements and eventually face the Fire Lord and end the war.
Love
Yay!
that!
No pressure. Okay,
Good.
The summary is just formality because we all know, I'm assuming we all know what Avatar is about. I hope we all know what Avatar is about. So I guess we'll just jump into our overall impressions. This will be mostly spoiler free, and I'll just kind of be covering some of my overarching thoughts about the show. And I just have to collect myself for a second. It's crazy. Like, this is probably the fourth time I watched the series, and I think, just to zoom out a little bit, it's really cool to see the way that Avatar has kind of ascended into a cultural reset status. And
no doubt.
I'm seeing, no doubt, yeah. And I'm seeing more and more appreciation for the show in recent years. And I do not say this lightly. It is legitimately probably one of my favorite pieces of media ever of all time. I don't even say that like in a nostalgia way, because honestly, as a kid, I wasn't as invested in the story. Like, it was just a show that I would sometimes see on TV. But as I watched it in its entirety as an adult many times, the show, I think, to me is just honestly almost pitch perfect. And I think the writing is fantastic. The characters, all of them, if not especially the villains, are layered and complex. And I think the world is really immersive. I think bending as a magic system is really interesting lore-wise, but also just visually very cool. And then I think, just to like go into a taste thing, I really love that the show has this almost vignette style of storytelling, in the sense that almost every episode is a contained story with the overarching plot just kind of running parallel to like these smaller adventures. And I think that because of that, we feel like we really know these characters in a more deep and meaningful way. And so they feel like they're not just defined by their single motivations, but which is what we see in a lot of other shows and animes. I think one of the main reasons that I love Avatar is that I think it's also at its heart a bit of a road trip story, or like a travel story, where we're just kind of dropped into this highly interesting world, and it has all of its nuances and all of these cultures. And I think as an audience, we feel like we're exploring that world along with the characters. And it really does a good job of making every episode feel like its own adventure and lingering in all these different parts of the world. And that's what makes the world building and the characters really stand out and feel super fleshed out. So yeah, watching it back in retrospect, especially these early episodes, I just have like a newfound admiration for how well the show lays the groundwork for its characters, its themes, and like the world and the plot. And I've really, really come to appreciate that the balance the show strikes between being a kid show, but also not being afraid of tackling very hard hitting themes
Yeah. Oh
like
yeah.
the reality and consequences of war, or like cultural genocide, colonialism, and
Yikes.
like a fascist government. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's like there's literally all of those things in a kid show. So I just think it's amazing and fantastic.
Hmm. I second that opinion. I watched it for the first time when I was in university, and I really enjoyed myself even when I was watching this show for the second time for the podcast. I like
Mhm.
had to remind myself to take notes because it was just so enjoyable to the point where I like
Yeah.
forgot that I was watching it. I was supposed to be watching it with an analytical eye. And even then it was
Right.
like, oh, like it does so many things well. I really don't have
Yeah.
a lot of things to like nitpick about it. So I
Mhm.
think I will agree with you when I say this show is like perfect.
Perfect question mark? I don't think that's an
The
exaggeration.
perfect
We do not say
show.
that lightly.
About the characters, I especially like its villains and its antagonists.
Mhm.
But
Yes.
also it's very likable and redeemable characters. Even protagonists
Yes.
that you do feel like have to have some sort of redemption, like Sokka being one of
Mhm.
the main three and still having um very evident flaws that kind of have to be redeemed throughout the series. I think
Right.
that's very interesting to include. Um I feel like for series and shows, there's usually a great advantage to being a character driven show. I don't know if that's just a personal taste thing, but I tend to
Mm.
favor shows that are character driven. I don't know why. Maybe it's because when you're getting to know characters, it feels a little bit like an organic way of getting to know someone new, and because of
Right.
that you're just more intrigued with their
Mhm.
character and you want to learn more about them. And so I don't have many like solid shows that come to mind when I think of shows that are primarily plot driven, but I would say
Right.
that this show is both equal parts plot driven and character driven. I
Mhm.
think that it has such a great mix of like drama, suspense, adventure, fantasy, and then also like comedy and lightheartedness for the like
Oh,
kids
yeah.
aspect.
Yeah.
Um, and then
Yeah.
finally, just the fact that this show is basically completely based off of like Eastern Asian cultures in a way that
Yes.
isn't
Yeah.
like
It's fantastic. Yeah.
trying to use that to sell itself. Do you know what I mean? It's
Right.
not like showing
Yes.
off the fact that it's
Yes.
diversifying
Yeah.
itself in that, oh, here's something that's finally not whitewashed, but it's
Mhm,
truly
mhm.
just showing us the beauty of these cultures and what these cultures have to offer. So
Yeah,
I
that's
really
true.
appreciate that.
And actually, like, if you actually zoom out and look, it's like none of these characters are like none of them are white. Like,
Mhm.
I think the air nomads are based on what, Tibetan culture, maybe?
Yes.
Um, and then yeah, and then the waterbenders are like based in Inuit culture,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
then yeah, and then East Asian culture. So yeah, that's actually something that I didn't really think about that much, especially as a kid, but even on rewatches.
Mhm,
So
mhm. Like
yeah, it's very
completely,
cool.
completely Eastern
Yes, yeah,
Asian. Okay, let's
yeah.
talk about episodes 1 to 3, the premise
Let's do
setup,
it.
the exposition, right?
I I'm constantly surprised at how much the writers can squeeze into a 20-minute episode. And I think even just looking at this first episode, like, what do we learn in the first episode alone? Like,
Mhm.
we establish the main cast and sort of like what their personalities and ambitions are, like what this show really does well, especially in these opening episodes, is establishing and understanding the stakes. And
Mhm.
I think that doing that early is so important because I feel like it's when the audience understands what the stakes are, that is what makes the show compelling because we're constantly wanting to see how the characters are going to like rise to meet
Yeah.
their motivations. And yeah, so I just think that like the first three episodes are really great for laying the groundwork.
Mhm. I remember like I was watching the first episode and I had to pause after like a few minutes in because I
Yeah.
had to write notes. Like I was like
Yeah, you're just like, oh my God.
just the first conversation. So the very first scene starts with just Katara and Sokka in their boat and they're just
Mhm.
conversing back and forth, and I was so mind blown at just how much information could be extracted from just watching one conversation
Yes. Oh
between
my
these
god,
two
yeah.
characters. As you said, it's so clear the establishment of their personalities,
Mhm.
how Sokka kind of just like flippantly dismisses Katara's waterbending abilities. But in doing so, that reveals something about his character, but he also gives viewers like a debrief on how waterbending works. So not only
Right.
do we get,
Yeah.
it's kind of like we're learning more about Sokka while also learning more about the
Yes.
world. Um,
Yes.
and then yes, it's established clearly what the stakes are. And then as we move forward throughout the series, the stakes constantly get higher in a
Yes.
very like
Yeah.
obvious way, but not all at
Yeah.
once. It's always like a few
Mhm,
episodes
mhm.
later, the stakes are got higher. A few
Yeah.
episodes later, it gets higher. So the pacing of
Mhm.
that is incredible as well. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
far, no bad things to say about.
I know, and honestly, like, just to also talk about lore exposition as well, like
Uh-huh.
you mentioned with, like, the water bending, I feel like, some animes just can't get their lore exposition right,
Mm.
but I just really love when, like, shows and books can
Yeah.
explain their magic systems or their lore in very interesting ways. So, for example, I think in episode 2, we sort of see a first look into Aang's avatar state.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's kind of like this thing that he doesn't have control of over yet, but it's just this immense power that he gets when he's in danger. And I really like that they tie this idea of the avatar state in episode 3, where they go to the Southern Air Temple. I really like that they tie that into Aang having to confront his grief and
Mhm.
anger and sadness and shame about running away from his responsibility. And I feel like that's so important that they kind of like they take the time to really set up this very important aspect of Aang's character, which is that he has to confront this responsibility that and this position of power and this role that he didn't ask for, but that it is his duty. And especially in episode 3, the writing and the setup of that episode and the way that it progresses is just so masterful because it starts off with just like Aang super excited to show them the air temple.
Mhm.
And then the whole time you see Katara and Sokka really uneasy and reluctant to kind of break Aang's sense of innocence that like you might see things that are going to be very difficult for
Yeah.
you to see. And that's just a very like it kind of creates that tension throughout the episode. And then finally when Aang realizes like everyone that he knows and loved has been killed while he was frozen in an iceberg,
Mhm.
it sort of triggers his avatar state again. And so I think that's another example of just really good lore exposition as well as multi-level writing and tying a plot beat into a character moment, if that
Yes.
makes sense.
Yes. I personally think that for every kid, one of the major emotional milestones is how to control and deal with your emotions. I'm glad that they tackled that idea in episode 3 of like grief, especially because grief is just
Yes.
such a
Yeah.
hard thing for a child to have to bear.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm glad that I think that they handled that topic with a lot of class because I think that you
Mhm.
could have shown him like experiencing that grief through a very cathartic emotional breakdown, but instead they
Right.
decided to show it by him entering the avatar state, which is supposed
Yes.
to imply a very high degree of emotional like distress or tension.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
that was handled with a lot of class. I thought that was very very good of them.
Mhm.
But yeah, just this topic, the idea of um it's okay to kind of have it let it get to you. It's okay because it happens to Aang
Yeah.
as well, right? Who is our main
Yeah. Mhm.
protagonist. Um but at the end, as long as you learn from that situation and
Yeah.
you realize what you do have, because towards the end of
Mhm.
that episode, the entire tension of that like topic is resolved when he realizes that now he has Katara and Sokka and that's going
Right.
to be his
Yeah.
new family. And so I'm
Mhm.
glad that they had that like optimistic twist at the very end
Yeah.
to like resolve that conflict.
Yeah, and like you said about like it's very important for kids to see that not only is it okay to feel these things, it's
Mm-hmm.
necessary to feel those things.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So let's move on to episodes 4 to 6.
Yes. I love Boomy's character. I think he's such a fun character. I think the fact that they use it as an opportunity to show flashbacks of Aang's like Aang 100 years ago,
Yeah.
like having fun with Boomy, and then taking this like basically like turning this whole episode into this like weird adventure. And it also is like a really fun time to explore Omashu. And I think that having this episode early on is great because we return to Omashu later on in season 2. And because we have this episode where we've gotten to know Boomy and we've gotten to know Omashu, when Omashu gets taken in season 2, it has a lot more
Yeah.
impact. So I think that's kind of what I mean as well when I say like laying the groundwork is just so good in this show.
Mm-hmm. In terms of laying the groundwork, it's so important to me that characters always learn something from
Yeah.
whatever they're going through.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that from this episode, though it was just, its own contained fun adventure
Yeah.
episode, they learn
Mhm.
to they learn to think outside of the box. When are they going to use that again? Oh, in a lot of episodes in the future. So we
Yeah.
never see any episode or scene go to waste here. Everything is
Yeah.
for character development, which is awesome.
Exactly. And I also like with Boomy's spar with Aang is that he's really um it doesn't just it isn't just like a visual thing. It's also a character moment because like
Mhm.
Boomy is basically calling Aang out for using typical airbending techniques of evading and avoiding aggression, and
Yeah, yeah.
that really comes back later when Aang has to learn how to earthbend and has a really hard time with it. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's just like themes are constantly established and brought back later, and it's just so good. The pacing is unparalleled.
Unparalleled. Episode 6 is when they meet Haru. I think this is the episode where we get really our first glance up close um at like oppression and injustice that exists in
Right.
the world in
Mhm.
terms of how exactly the Fire Nation controls and oppresses certain villages and towns, both on like a political and a humanitarian plane. So Katara gets herself into the prisons to save Haru and his family. Along the way, I think that one of the things that I really appreciate from this show is that they always show you the consequences of our actions, whether they're done by a protagonist, a side character, or an antagonist. Because
Mhm.
I do think that sometimes I feel ways about characters that try to like stick their nose into something that they don't necessarily fully
Yeah.
understand.
Mhm.
And at the beginning of this episode, I felt like Katara was just doing just that. Like she was always really
Mhm.
idealistic,
Yeah.
optimistic, trying to solve problems by saying, "Oh, you guys just need some hope." Right? But then you get to see the very real consequences of her actions. Like Haru gets taken into custody by the Fire Nation soldiers because she's the one who tells him, "Don't be afraid to use your bending." But then he gets arrested. So, there's consequences to our actions, and I think that's one of the things that I really like about this show as well. It portrays life both in a
Mm.
rose-colored lens, but also realistically, it's like it's so paradoxical to say, but they do it. They do both, and they do it both great.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this episode is a really good example of one of the things that I really love about Avatar specifically is that they take the time to linger in the stories of these random people and
Yes.
explore and really go into the details of what a war-torn world really looks like
Hmm.
and how that trickles down into the lives of real people instead of just because sometimes like when you're just focused on like the
The
the big
protagonist.
bad and the big good. Yeah, it's kind of like and that's fine, but again, we're more interested in the human stories, and I
Mm,
think that those are the ones that hit the hardest.
for sure.
Yeah, and so I'm just really partial to that. And I think, yeah, again, what you said about Katara, like her sticking her nose into everyone's business out of this like sense of like moral justice
Hmm.
is it's true to her character.
Oh yeah.
It's not just a convenient plot
No,
thing to
no,
like
no.
get the adventure started. It's very true to her character. And I think like I almost like that it's portrayed a little bit as her being very naive, because I think that that's also a very resonant thing for kids, is like,
Yeah, that's
you
true.
feel something and you believe in it so strongly, but we just feel so powerless sometimes. I think that's very relevant
Mm-hmm.
to the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Young people just feeling very powerless in a very oppressive situation. Um, and so I like that they explore this idea of, yeah, the road to doing the right thing is very difficult, but there's
Yes.
still, at the end of the day, it's optimistic, and she does break the prisoners out, and hope is very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like you kind of get whiplash a little bit in the best way. They explore all the nuances of what it means
Yeah.
to stand up for yourself and to have hope and to face the consequences of your actions. It's just really great.
Awesome. Okay. Episode 7 and 8, they go to the spirit world, and then they also learn about Avatar Roku. So
Yes.
these two episodes are very um how
Lore
do you say?
heavy.
Yeah, lore heavy, exactly.
Yeah.
Um
These episodes are lore heavy, but they don't feel like a burden to watch. Sometimes I feel like
right.
if lore isn't done well, it can just feel very info dumpy.
Mhm.
And I think that what I really like about this is the spirit world, specifically the way it's portrayed in this show. I think this show uses the spirit world as a way to kind of create this ethereal
Yes.
um, vibe to an episode, and I really like the way they use the idea of like mysticism and its
And
kind of
it's very
role in the
important
narrative.
for a lot of Eastern Asian cultures as well.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
important to
So it
their
feels very true to that.
traditions.
I
Yeah.
agree. So I think these episodes are really great, and I think, yeah, they're just great on multiple levels. Aang confronts a lot of things here, and
Mhm.
he confronts his greater responsibility. And then we meet Roku. He also kind of sets the stakes for the rest of the show, because he's the
Mhm.
one that tells him like, this is what Sozin's comet is, and this is
Right.
like
The
basically
stakes get higher.
here's the deadline for when you need to
Yeah.
kill Ozai.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like you can kill him whenever you want. It's like you literally have to confront him like this
Mhm.
summer or whatever.
That's
And
like what
so
I
I think
felt before
Mhm.
quarantine. Now it's like I have no deadlines.
I have no deadlines ever. Yeah. So I think that that's just it's really great because it's lore exposition, but it's also it's done in a very interesting way, and because of everything that we know about Aang's character up until
Mm.
this point, the sort of this is really a turning point for him where he's like he's really starting to feel the pressure. So yeah, like you said, it just really raises the stakes.
And then the small things that we learned from this episode as well, like I believe this is the first time I think that we really get to see Sokka's genius just jump out.
Yeah.
Like I think I see myself in Sokka in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
And I mean,
I
maybe
yeah.
it's just a young adult thing. Like
Mhm.
young adults think that they can relate to any pessimistic character, but the
Oh
way that
god,
we
yeah.
start to get a true sense of Sokka's real character, and the
Mhm.
four-dimensional aspect of it is
And
like,
also on Sokka's character, like it's it's just very believable that he would be like
mm-hmm,
that. I mean, he's literally traveling with two very powerful benders. He's constantly
mm-hmm,
surrounded by benders, and he's kind of had to be pushed into this quote unquote head of the family role very young in his life
yeah.
because him and Katara's mom passed away, and also his dad is off fighting in the war. So all of these things are just very realistic, and I think on rewatches, I definitely do appreciate Sokka's character a lot more, and just the way that he's able to, yeah, just prove himself, like in the midst of like being a non-bender, and yeah, I don't know. I just like really relate to his cynicism, in
Like
the best way.
he uses his brains, which is all he's got,
Mhm.
and he uses it to its full capacity. So can't relate,
Yeah,
but
but I try,
but I
and
try.
that's the lesson
You know
here.
what? I try to use my brain to its full capacity. Its full capacity is low, so I'm trying my best.
I
Okay.
do the best with what I have.
Exactly.
Oh
All right.
god.
Episode 9. Okay, so episode 9 is when Katara is she kind of gets like jealous when she's
Mhm.
watching Aang learn how to waterbend.
Yeah.
I think, okay, when I was watching this episode, I initially actually thought this was out of character for her because I think that
Oh.
most people, when you try to describe Katara, and this might just be me, I
Hmm.
don't know, when you try to describe Katara to somebody else, you think of her as the mom friend. And when you think of a
Right.
mom friend, you think of a friend who is like, she's like the cool, collected one of the group,
Mhm.
the responsible one. But
Yeah.
I'm glad that she like loses her head in this episode.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then the more you think about it, you think, oh, this is actually so in character for her because
Right.
she's so competitive. Her sense of
Mhm.
pride is so reliant on her intelligence and on her skills and on
Mhm.
her bending
Mhm.
skills. And so you realize that, yeah, this actually is in character for her. And I think that this potential misreading of her character is a good thing because it means that she's not only bound to um one certain dimension, like she's not just the
Right.
mom friend, she's so much more than that. I
Yeah.
think is a testament to how amazingly nuanced her character writing is.
I found this whole thing with Aang and Katara very relatable. Just the
Hmm.
sense of you defining or having Katara define so much of herself on some personality trait or some
Right.
ability. So in this case, her waterbending, and then having someone completely new to waterbending just be so good at it so immediately when
Talent
she feels like
versus
she's
hard
been working.
work.
Yeah, exactly. And I just when I was watching it again, I was like, you know what? Hashtag relatable because sometimes like, you know, when I think about like my own career as a designer and seeing people from completely different fields being able to pivot so successfully
Yeah.
into, something that you've been working really hard on,
Hmm.
or same thing with writing, right?
Um, I have something in my notes under this episode called "Why is Iroh the Goat?"
Pyro.
So
I love
and
Pyro.
so I would just like to take this moment to a moment of silence to just appreciate Iroh. Ready? Here we
Yes.
go. Awesome. Thank you.
You were laughing through that moment of silence. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, Iroh, I feel like I have a lot of things to say about Iroh. I will like save it for when we talk about future seasons
Sure.
because I can't talk off the cuff about Iroh.
Uh-huh.
His whole character just like I'm like vibrating right now. His whole character just makes me so warm and fuzzy, but also an emotional wreck. So
And how
yeah.
amazing is it to see an like a senior character get
Hmm.
so much action. Like I feel
Hmm.
like elderly characters these days are so confined to either being like the close-minded obstacle that the protag has to
Yes.
overcome
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
the very wise father figure, which I mean he still is,
He is. Yeah.
but Iroh has his like own adventures.
Yeah.
So just thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
portraying elders in a way that isn't just static. Like he's such
It
an active
100%.
elderly character.
He's such a pivotal role in this story. Like
Mhm.
he really is like a very important character, like especially in relation to Zuko's character arc, but even on his own. You really see him have to confront his past
Mhm.
and yeah, like you said,
Like
it's
he
just a
gets his
great
own arc
he
basically.
gets his own arc, yeah, and like you said, like adult or elder characters often are just there in the background to
Mhm.
advance other people's plots forward, but he does really stand on his own, and I think he's one of the best characters in the show. So
Hard agree. All right, episode 10. I
yeah,
freaking love this episode. I know
I
you love this
love this
episode.
episode. I love this
You can
episode.
go first for this one.
This is, I think, my second favorite episode, second only to episode 13,
Mm.
The Blue Spirit. So
Mhm.
this is the episode where we meet Jet, who is kind of this Robin Hood-esque character.
Mm.
He literally like lives in the forest or something with his like his other
Posse.
friends, and they kind of like, yeah, they're just like a bit of like a Robin Hood squad, social justice vigilantes. I don't know, is that the right word?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the reason that I like this show so much is because the show also goes into um kind of how war affects people differently. And Jet is someone whose ideology and motivations you can honestly like justifiably understand. And he's portrayed as
That's
this
right.
charismatic likable leader. He's fighting for the little guy, and he's just trying to stand up in any way that he can and really find these small victories. But at the same time, the show really emphasizes this idea that we can't forget people's humanity, even if they are our enemies.
Right.
And that's a theme that comes back throughout the show, like with Katara later on, having to face like her own grief, and
Mm-hmm.
even with when Aang has to confront the reality of what it means to end the war. And so this is kind of like a teaser into that theme, and also like it's just like a very nuanced and morally gray situation to present in a
Right.
kid's show, and I think it was done really well.
Overcoming grief, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Understanding manipulation, very hard to understand. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think, isn't it like, I think it's whack that we could put our trust in a random stranger if they're charismatic enough, if they are, if
Yeah.
they seemingly have the justified opinion about something. As you said, like, it's
Mm-hmm.
understandable, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
completely true, but at the same time, because we think that it's understandable, that's when we are susceptible to becoming manipulated. Because
Yeah.
like Katara and Aang, we can think, oh, but they're fighting for a good cause. I don't understand, right? So,
Yes. Yeah.
as you said, like the morally gray being taught in a kids show is just like we need that in a kids show.
Especially just watching it back, I don't really see him as a villain. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
see him as someone who is a
Misguided.
product, yeah, misguided for sure, and a product of, the situation and just the he's been dealt a pretty crappy hand in life, and
Yes,
I can see how
yes.
those ideas would have manifested in him. So, yeah, he's like a super interesting character.
I'm glad that we got two different vibes from this episode because it's like
Mhm.
you can teach so many things in these 20
Yeah.
minutes, you know?
Exactly, and I like that the show kind of starts off a little bit lighthearted because, like, Katara's a little bit
Yeah.
enamored with him. Like, that's just so fun. I
Yeah.
just it's just I like that every episode starts off super fun and is able
Mhm.
to escalate, in such interesting ways.
So we learn that Aang's greatest fear is not being there for those who need him, which
Yes.
in reality actually already happened.
Yes.
Where and it's like you realize like where do you go from here when you realize that your greatest fear has been realized? And then
Yeah.
also like that fear like I believe that fear can really make you paranoid about the future. And I was just thinking to
Right.
myself like what a dark implication for kids to like think about.
Yup.
But anyways, yeah, this is the episode where we contrast Aang's past with Zuko's past. I really like this episode because I do think that this episode almost subverts what we think we already know about our protag and our main antagonist so far,
Mhm.
because we see that Aang has something bad happen to him in the past, and his reaction to that is that he runs away. And
Right.
then on the other hand, you see Zuko getting himself into a bad situation because of his morality.
Mhm.
Because he initially tries to talk back against one of the generals in his father's war room about
Mhm.
attacking this village unnecessarily or something. And then not only that, but after he gets himself into this crappy situation, he begs for mercy. Like he gets down on his knees
Right.
in front of his
Yeah.
father. And I
Mhm.
would say that in all aspects, when you compare the two backstories, Zuko's backstory is particularly hard to swallow because
Right.
as an audience, we often feel like there's a great injustice that happens when
Mhm.
a really terrible fate is dealt upon somebody who we believe is morally good. And
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
established that he's morally good when he talks back against the general in the war room. And so, in all
Mhm.
aspects, Zuko has the painful backstory, the more painful backstory. And then flash forward to the present, and we see, like, what do we see? Zuko is our antagonist. We're supposed to
Right.
hate him. And it's
Right.
like, you just feel that life is unfair, you know?
Yeah. I agree 100%. And I think that, first of all, I think this show really strives and achieves, um, at constantly showing Aang and Zuko, yeah, first of all, how their journeys are paralleled, but also how they are just products of their upbringing and their circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
and how they were both born into expectations,
Yeah.
positions of power for a myriad of reasons beyond their control, and how they feel the pressure from those responsibilities and those expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what you said about Zuko being sort of portrayed here, maybe for not the first time, but like one of the clearer times, that he's morally good, or that there's goodness in him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is super important because he's been portrayed as a villain up until this point. So this kind of subverts that. But then also the show doesn't, it doesn't like, it's not like it sticks with that. Like there are moments where in the show where you really see Zuko's goodness, but
Yeah.
then there are also moments where he really just goes back to
Mm-hmm.
being susceptible to, the brainwashing of his upbringing.
Yeah.
Um, and there are a lot of moments where, he betrays that goodness that's in him, and he betrays Iroh. And so, but through that, you're constantly like holding out hope for seeing
Mm-hmm.
Zuko's character evolve. Um,
But we get the groundwork here, right? Like we
yeah,
get
we're
that.
laying the groundwork here.
Yeah, like you
Yeah.
get that favor towards him starting in book one,
Yes.
and which makes his redemption arc in book two and three like all the more
Yeah,
cathartic, and like
exactly.
you feel like
Yeah,
it's the
and I
right
think
payoff.
that he's just written he's just written to be so to feel so particularly human, because he's so flawed, and he's constantly making mistakes, and he's constantly being pulled by so many people in so many different directions, that he really feels like lost at so many different instances in the show. And so I think that's why in particular I just love his character writing so much. I relate to him so much, and I think a lot of people do.
Hmm.
So let's talk about the Blue Spirit, episode 13. This is my favorite episode in this season for so many reasons. I think, number one, I think the stakes feel very high in this episode, because
Hmm.
Aang getting captured and knowing that Sokka and Katara are incapacitated just like makes the stakes feel really high, because you're like, how's Aang gonna get out of this? And then when the Blue Spirit shows up, there's a bit of like mysticism and like mystery
Yeah.
around like who's helping him. And so I just kind of like the sort of compelling question of like, oh, what's happening? Is this like some new lore? Like, is this a
Uh-huh.
spirit helping him out?
Uh-huh.
And, what does he want? Like, is he actually really good? Like, is this spirit just like helping Aang for his own reasons? So there's a lot of, yeah, there's just like a mystery that sort of drives the episode forward.
Hmm.
And then at the end, when the reveal that when the mask falls off and we realize that it's Zuko that's been helping Aang this whole time, I think it's like you get that first taste of like
Yeah.
how powerful these two could be if they were
Oh my
allies.
gosh, yes.
And I think that having the storm episode right before this episode is so
Yes.
perfect for laying the groundwork
Yes.
for these two characters. And I feel like the fact that this episode and this moment where they're helping each other, or that where Zuko is helping Aang, the fact that it comes so early in the series really sets the tone for the rest of their encounters for the rest of the show. And I think our perception of Aang and Zuko's relationship, I guess, is sort of colored by this episode and this moment,
Hmm.
because every time they meet from here on out, like you wonder what's going to happen, and that they do have the capacity to like work together and to understand each other. And I think what really seals the deal on this episode is when Aang at the very end,
Yeah.
Zuko is kind of he's fainted, and Aang is just kind of sitting there like sort of waiting for him to wake up. And he
That
as Zuko
scene
is
makes
waking
me like
up,
emotional. Like
it
just
makes me
thinking
emotional,
about like
yeah. Because Aang wonders if in another life they could be friends. And then there's this sort of like moment of silence, and then Zuko just attacks him. And I think the moment is so good visually, but also narratively. And I think that just that feeling of like lingering, and like we have the capacity to be friends maybe, but this is just the life we've been dealt for reasons
hmm.
beyond our control. And I think it feels very helpless but also very hopeful in the same moment. It's just so good. I have a lot of feelings about this.
This episode truly
Yeah.
is like a catalyst or like a kickstart to his redemption arc. I would say that
Yes.
his redemption
Hmm.
starts here. And though his motivations still remain foggy, I think that
Mhm.
the counterintuitiveness of seeing Zuko as as the blue spirit that rescues Aang, it
Mhm.
sets into motion like a whole bunch of questions that we might have about his true nature.
Yes,
And
yeah.
it comes as a shock to viewers because the persona of the blue spirit, as you said, it's more like ethereal. It belongs to the
Mhm.
spirit world. That's why it's called the blue
Yes, yeah.
spirit, right? And
Mhm.
that is just so counter to what we already know about Zuko's personality, because we are
Mhm.
often presented with a Zuko that is very, as most firebenders are, very flashy and very showy and very hot-headed. But when we
Yeah.
think about the blue spirit, well, blue is a cold color. The
Yeah.
spirit, the ethereal aspect, and the side of him that's like calm and has to be like cunning and almost sleuth-like in the way
Mhm.
that he moves and like welds his blades, sneaks in and out of the wherever they were, the Fire Nation
Yeah.
palace. As I said, it goes back to just how three-dimensional these characters actually
Yeah.
are, and that
Yeah.
you get to know those different dimensions of them the more you watch it, the more you go on through the series.
Mhm. Yeah, so episode 14 is called The Fortune Teller, and I think what I like about this episode is that it dives into themes of like destiny versus action.
Mhm.
And yeah, even when everyone realizes that Aunt Wu she's kind of what she's doing is kind of baloney and it's
Mhm.
kind of just random,
Mhm.
the show still doesn't completely discount the value of just kind of putting your faith in whatever,
Mhm.
and just it's okay to want to believe in random mystical things, and how
Right.
destiny and action are both important and they're not mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
So it's kind of this idea of like, hey, don't be complacent in life and don't rely completely on oracles, but also like there's a comfort in being able to let go, because you can't do everything, right?
Mhm. I think it was so comedic how one of the recurring themes of this episode was love. And
Yeah.
isn't it
Yeah.
so, like, of course we always want to know who we're gonna end up marrying. Um
Right.
like, why do we rely on fortunes and signs for love? And I think that the like
Yes.
this
Ugh.
episode. Okay, wait, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think, I would like your opinion, do you think Katara
Yeah.
likes Aang for who he is, or because she knew that she would
All right.
eventually
Are
marry
we
him?
gonna open this can of worms like right now? Because we can do it. I think that I here's what I think. I think that Katara and Aang being endgame
Mhm.
is the correct answer. However, However, I also think that their character writing, their relationship writing could have been handled a little bit better.
Okay.
Or I shouldn't say better, like I don't want to be like prescriptive about it, especially with
Mhm.
a show like this. But I think that I can hear you laughing. Um the thing is I do think that Katara does love Aang. Like by the end of the show, like romantic love. I do
Mhm.
believe that. And I
Mhm.
believe that it's in line with their characters. People that don't like Katara and Aang together will make several arguments. I think the first one they'll make is that, and I think that it's slightly valid, that they didn't feel like they saw enough of Katara's reciprocating those feelings.
Reciprocation. Mhm.
Exactly. And most of the show is like focused on Aang's crush on her, and
Mhm.
it does feel like it's portrayed as comedy a lot of the time. And so it's not really, I feel like their romance, it could have been written with a little bit more layered
Right.
complexity, because if the plan was to make them endgame, I do think at some point it should have been treated a little bit more seriously, because
Mhm.
it kind of feels like it goes from Aang likes Katara's thinking about it, and then we don't touch it until like the end
Mm.
where they like kiss.
Surprise.
Surprise. And so yeah, so I do feel like the relationship is genuine. I like that um they decided to put them together, because I just think that the idea or the relationship dynamic of friends to lovers, or like I don't know. I just feel like Friends to Lovers is not as explored in shows
Mm.
that much anymore. Like everyone is all about enemies to lovers and like, this I
Sorry.
here's the thing. I'm not trying to hate on the trope. I do like the trope a lot, but I think that people tend to value that trope over any other like relationship dynamic when I
Sure,
honestly
sure.
believe I honestly do believe that like Friends to Lovers and that exploration is more realistic
Mm.
and it's just as engaging and compelling and beautiful and I think if they had handled the writing a little bit better, people maybe would have shipped this a little bit more.
The next one talks about we get to meet Bato from the Water Tribe and Jong
Mhm.
Jong the Deserter from the Fire Nation.
I like that the writers aren't afraid to show that, just to continually return to the fact that our protagonists and our characters are flawed and sometimes they will do things that even as an audience will be like that's like wrong, but also what I like is that it really causes some real tension and conflict between the main trio, and it
Hmm.
reminds viewers that, you know, the main characters' friendships are constantly going to be challenged. No matter how much they love
Right.
each other, that's just the reality of war. It's the reality of the situation that they're in,
Hmm.
and I think that the conflict between the main characters is just so important for um, having the characters grow and learn.
Now that you
So
mention that point,
yeah,
it makes me think of all these times when the characters, our protags, wrong each other, and the writers always make it a point to show explicitly the moment when the characters come to realize how they've wronged each other, and then there is
yeah,
a whole moment of apologizing and the other party forgiving them. And I love that resolution always being explicitly shown, because I think
yes.
that you
Oh
can
my god,
always
yeah.
get caught up in the
Hmm.
conflict, but especially for little kids, you have to show them how to resolve conflict
I agree.
instead of always
Yeah.
getting into it. And it's nice to show kids that sometimes you don't realize what you've done, or that what
Yeah.
you are doing is something dumb, until it's too late to fix it. And so it's important to show kids um, that yes, you have to apologize, but also that there's room for apology, that they will forgive you
Yeah.
if you're genuine about it.
Yeah, and, like, sometimes specifically with that moment with Aang burning Katara's hands,
Hmm.
I really like I really like this episode. I
Yes.
really like this episode a lot.
Hmm.
It's so important to me that this episode happens early in the show because this really sets up another big hurdle for Aang. It's the first time that he tries firebending,
Yeah.
and he knows he'll have to learn it eventually. But this episode makes him scared of firebending and how
Hmm.
potentially destructive it is. And just like, and they really go into, and this episode also has lore exposition.
A
It
lot.
goes into sort of the like bending as an art form and how it's very different from the other ones because you're really trying to tame a very destructive element, a very dangerous element.
Hmm.
And it kind of goes into when you're given such immense power, how that power can be misused. And then for Zhang Zhang as well, this is the first time we see a quote unquote like good firebender or a
Hmm.
firebender that doesn't hold the same ideals as
Hmm.
his nation. And I think that it's really essential that the show reminds us that entire societies can't be generalized and that,
Mm.
despite it all, the Fire Nation as a whole isn't the enemy, it's the people in power who are misusing that power that are
Hmm.
the enemy.
And just as like a fantasy fanatic, like
Yeah.
just learning that, oh, like these are the tenets of waterbending, these are the tenets of earthbending, and
Mhm.
this is how firebending differs. Like
Yeah.
that's so cool, isn't it? Just
It's
like
so
on
cool.
a basic like objective level, that is, there's so much nuance put into the differentiation between the bendings, and yet
Mhm.
still somehow we come to appreciate all of them equally. There's never a strong favor that is given to any one
Right.
type of bending. I think that's just super fun, and that is
Yeah.
one of the reasons why so many people and so many kids are kept engaged throughout the story. And then
Mhm.
just like the final battle of that episode of Zhao versus Aang, and how you see what's been
Right.
explored towards the beginning of the episode really being manifested in the end,
Yes.
and how Zhao is kind of outsmarted by Aang because Aang knows now the tenets of firebending and how fire is so hard to control, whereas we know Zhao to
Mhm.
be the failed student who wasn't able to learn that lesson, and so we see
Right.
him like burning up all his ships.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
goes back to the point, it nothing's ever wasted in this
I
series.
agree. And also, this is a side note. There's this
Mm-hmm.
writer, this fantasy writer named Brian Sanderson, very prolific fantasy writer, and he coined the terms soft magic system and hard magic system. So
Mm.
if you're ever trying to write a fantasy and are trying to figure out what your magic system is or what you want it to be, I would like highly recommend like checking it out, because I think that Avatar is referenced as a great example of a hard magic system,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that like the rules of bending are introduced, explained, explored, and like elevated.
Elevated in a lot of understandable and realistic ways. Not just,
Exactly.
oh, where did
Yeah.
that come from, right?
Exactly. And that's what makes it cool. That's
Mm-hmm.
what makes
That's
the
what
rule
makes
of
it like
cool.
way more cool, exactly. Like, because
Yeah.
if it was something that was beyond comprehension, it would kind of
Yeah.
just be like, okay, I'll
That
accept
doesn't make
it.
any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be like an unwilling acceptance of whatever they present to us, but
Exactly.
all right, and then finally, episode 17 of the section. I really
Yeah.
liked this episode.
Yeah.
Um, love. Okay, like by the time we get to episode 17, and I saw their amazing portrayal of a character with like a physical impairment, I was like, yeah, of
Mhm.
course this series would do this right. What else does it do wrong? Nothing.
Yeah.
But Teo as a portrayal of a character with a physical impairment, I think that it's so important to portray these kinds of characters in a positive light
Yes.
rather than a light
Mhm.
where it's like, you poor thing.
Yeah.
It just highlights the disability too much.
Yeah.
Whereas
I
for
agree.
this series takes a lot of care to show how Teo is, he is on par in every way with Aang when he's in
Mhm.
the air. Aang, who
Yeah.
is an actual airbender, and they are on par with their speed, their agility, like the techniques that they can do in the air. And so his
Mhm.
disability is shed in a very positive light. And in fact, it actually is a motivating factor for him to go further beyond what some people might think he's capable of. And then it segues into an amazing discussion about tradition versus progress, which has
Right.
nothing to do with physical impairment, right? Like
Yeah.
they don't linger on that subject for too long at all. So I think I really, really like this episode for those reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, like, now that you mention it, like, I actually didn't have anything on my notes about Teo, like, not having use of his legs and, like, being
Mm-hmm.
in a wheelchair, because, like, they don't talk about it that much. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't even remember them talking about it that much, and I think that is, like, great representation in its own way. I really like that the episode explores this idea of, technology
Mm-hmm.
and sort of Aang's immediate aversion to it, but slowly being able to accept it and accept the fact that, you know, in their own way, the people that are now living in this air temple are kind of keeping the spirit of airbenders alive.
Yeah.
So I really liked that, because it's kind of like, hey, we can use like science and technology for such powerful things.
So we're gonna go straight into the finale, episodes 19 to 20, The Siege of the North.
Yes.
This finale did not disappoint me. Like
Mhm.
there was so much going on, and
There's
then
so much
there
happening.
was so much happening, but at the same time, the stakes, like the stakes were always high. There was so much
Yeah.
happening, but I never felt like I was confused about why things were happening. So
Right.
a great example that I have of this is when um Iroh, like General Iroh gets there and he's like chastising Zhao for trying to kill the moon spirit and eventually doing
Mhm.
so, and he like
Yeah.
fights back against his warriors. I feel like that's a scene that very well could have been like a, why is Iroh fighting against his own people kind of moment.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
because of the setup that I've been getting and the all I know about Iroh and his character, this is so believable to me, you know?
Yeah.
And when I
Exactly.
say that so many things happen, if we think about it, we are in the tundra. We are in the water tribe's walls. We are in
Yeah.
their spiritual sanctuary. We are in the
Yeah.
spirit world. Like
Yeah.
we get to see and pass so many different settings, and there are so many multiple storylines happening that it can easily be confusing. But
Mhm.
somehow the writers are able to connect everything together within the span of a 2 episode duration,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
that's what I want from a finale, you know?
It's crazy because the writing, like we've been saying, is just so efficient and the pacing is so pitch
Mm-hmm.
perfect. And like just to jump back to the first part before the battle actually happens, I really like that episode 19. It feels like this calm before the storm type episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we before the actual siege starts, we take the time to check in on all the characters. And
Yeah.
I like that. I think that knowing and establishing strongly like where everyone's headspace and like goals and motivations
Right.
and hopes for, the siege, like I think knowing all of that creates a lot more impactful action and just better thematic payoff. And then yeah, for part 2, the imagery of Zhao like slaying the moon spirit, and I think like everything sort of turns this blood red color like in the
Mm.
actual like visual animation.
Mm-hmm.
That visual is so strong and literally paints the episode in this feeling of like violence and hopelessness.
Yes.
And it's not only Aang that tells Zhao that's wrong, but like you said, it's Iroh. And I think that explores one of Avatar's core themes, which is like the destructiveness of going against nature for personal
Mm-hmm.
gain.
Mm-hmm.
And that really like comes up a lot in the show. I like the thematic significance of Yue sacrificing herself
Mm-hmm.
to become the
It's
moon
become
spirit again.
like a
It's a
meme,
meme now.
but it's
It's
still
become a meme.
powerful.
But let's zoom out for a second. And Sokka's
Yeah,
girlfriend
yeah,
became
yeah.
the moon. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you actually think about Yue's character, we literally only know her for like 2.5 episodes before she like becomes the moon.
Uh-huh.
But I think that her sacrifice is still powerful because what we learn about her is that she the moon spirit kind of gave her life as a baby. Like I think her parents like prayed to the moon spirit or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and the moon spirit saved her as a baby. And so this idea of her giving her life back to the moon spirit mirrors the sort of natural balance or
Oh, that's
circle of life
true.
theme that is especially strong
Like give and take.
during this finale. And I would say it's a pillar of the show as well.
Mm-hmm.
And just also the imagery of the fish in the pond, like the moon spirit and the ocean spirit circling each other in
Mm.
the pond. It's like very cyclical.
In my notes, I wrote, I can't believe Sokka is literally out here having a romantic affair arc during the season finale and the final battle.
I didn't.
What the heck?
Okay, I don't want this to sound like a critique because
Okay.
honestly, if I were to zoom out and think of it as a kid's show and like I'm not gonna it's not really a critique, but
Okay. This is just
I
a
just
side
feel
thought.
this is just a side thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um it's like Sokka like falls in love with Princess Yue
I
like in
knew
the
it.
blink of an eye. Like
I
it
knew
happens
it.
so fast. It's like boom. But you know
I
what?
remember
Whatever.
the moment. No, I remember.
Yeah.
It's when they're on Appa, and then
Yes.
Katara goes, "It's beautiful here," and then Sokka turns his head, sees her, and goes, "It sure is."
Here's the
I
thing.
remember.
Here's the thing. From what we know about Sokka's character, like it's not out of character for him to just decide that he loves this girl.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine, and that's the reason why I'm not going to add it as a critique. But the other
Mhm.
thing is, I didn't feel though that their 48-hour romance it was necessary to make Yue's character and sacrifice have impact.
I
Like
see.
I can see why they would want to add in the side romance because
Mhm.
it's a kids show, and I think having the romantic attachment via Sokka is easy for kids to like follow and understand and like
Mm.
to attribute more meaning to her character.
Mhm.
It's not a critique. I just think it's like it's just like really you had to like make her like a romantic love interest for like 2 seconds. Whatever.
Right.
I'm over
Right.
it.
And then the last point that I had about the last episode, episode 20, is when Zhao is getting taken away by the ocean
Mm-hmm.
spirit, and
Yes.
Zuko reaches out to him and he retracts his hand from him.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really powerful. I can't help but think about what Zuko's reaction would have been to being saved by Aang while they were in the tundra. You know how
Yeah.
Aang is like, we can't leave him here, he'll die.
Right.
But he
Yeah.
was unconscious in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it truly just goes to show how much of a role pride has played in Admiral Zhao's life.
I agree, actually. I never thought about that. Like, I never thought about this idea of like, if he had been conscious to see Aang helping him and like how that pride would have affected him, maybe
Mm-hmm.
negatively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I do think that that moment that with between Zhao and Zuko is like it's so important, and I think it lasts only a second, but I
Yeah,
think
it's
it
so
really
fast.
it speaks volumes to, again, the goodness that is like lying deep down in Zuko's heart, that he would
Mm-hmm.
so quickly put aside his goals to help someone that like he doesn't have to, and that
Mm-hmm. Has been
he
actively
shouldn't.
against him,
Yeah,
tries to
exactly.
assassinate him. Amazing. Any other last points?
I love that we get a tease for Azula
Oh,
at the
that's
very end.
right. That's right.
Yeah, Azula, our season 2-3 villain, is a fantastic character. So
She's so hot.
she's period.
She's so good. Just
She has truly she has truly ascended into a cultural reset status. I scroll on Twitter sometimes and I
yeah.
see her as people's icons like 3 times a day probably. And I'm like, is this the same Azula Stan account or is this a different one?
Oh, tell me how
It's
she
always a different
has
one.
a 2-second scene in this book, and we are
And her
talking
power?
about her in this podcast.
I think it's so interesting that Azula, she is honestly a vicious character, but so many people love her.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic writing is what it is, folks.
Take notes, everyone.
Take notes, everyone.
Notes.
Okay, so our next segment is called the Bechdel test. So this is a test that was devised by a cartoonist named Alison Bechdel, and it's basically a measure of representation or female representation in any given media. So the test comprises of 3 easy questions. So the questions are there at least 2 named female characters? Do they speak to each other? And do they speak to each other about something other than a male love interest? So
I don't know if this show passes the Bechdel test.
yeah, I think it's actually very exciting that we finally have a show where we can very definitively say it does, because if you look
It's
at all our
very
other
exciting.
episodes, it's like, does it?
Yes, but I don't want it to.
Yes, but I don't want it to
Yes,
pass.
but it barely passes.
Yeah, but this show definitively
This is very exciting for
definitely
us.
passes. It's so exciting, guys.
We didn't even have to talk about it beforehand. We weren't even like,
yeah.
so do you think it passes? Like we usually are.
Yeah.
But not only that, but it outwardly, explicitly has episodes that speak to the portrayal of female characters and feminism, sexism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at you, episode 18. This is the episode where we meet Master Paku for the first time, and he initially refuses to teach Katara waterbending, but because she's a girl. So I love that this comes in at episode 18, which is towards the end of the season, because at this point we already know that Katara is more than capable of holding her own in a bending battle. So we immediately feel for her. We're in her shoes. We feel the pain of the injustice that she's dealt. And so it's clear what position and stance the writer is taking for this episode.
I agree with you that I think it's great that this comes in at the end of the season, because earlier in the season we see that Katara is like already facing like misogynistic comments from Sokka, like, and every time Sokka acts misogynistic, even for comedy, he's always called out on it and he's always reprimanded
either
for it.
by other characters or by situational things that happen to him.
Exactly. And it never feels like pandering. It never feels heavy-handed. And even in like the Warriors of Kyoshi episode, which is literally all about Sokka being like, you guys are just a bunch of girls.
Mhm.
That's literally his like his whole arc in that episode is just him thinking that he can like come up in here and think that he's a better warrior than these women that have literally been training
Uh-huh.
in this art form for like years and years. And I feel like Suki also challenges Sokka's misogyny, not even just by like saying like, hey, that's like really a really bad thing of you to say, like don't
Hey.
think of girls like that. She doesn't just say that, she
Mhm.
shows it, like she shows that she's cool and stuff.
Mhm.
So I think that's really a really good exploration of themes of
Yeah.
misogyny.
Just
So
on the topic
yeah.
of Sokka now and the way
Mhm.
that he portrays misogyny. It
Yeah.
This show was unlike anything that I've seen before in that it explicitly portrays sexism in the show and then they're subverting it, right? So
Mhm.
it's amazing to see because not a lot of other shows, you don't see other shows doing it. You see other shows kind of beating around the bush because what they're trying to do is that they're trying to show you, oh yeah, like this is how you should act. Whereas this show is more
Mm.
so, here, this is how you shouldn't act because A, this is what will happen, and B, this is why it's wrong. So it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
explicitly teaching you why misogyny is wrong. What are the
Yeah.
consequences of it, right? And to ascribe the role of misogynist to the main character, like part of the
Yeah.
main three
One of the
cast,
main characters, yeah.
and have that presence always be there, but having him learn along the way and like having that be a part of
Mhm.
his character development is, I think, is it's like masterful. And
Yeah. With just Paku, like going back to Paku,
Mhm.
I think the sort of like little twist of him being a misogynist and sort of defending it in the name of like, that's just our culture and traditions. And like,
Yeah.
if you're here, you're just going to abide by that. And like, Katara and Aang just like don't accept that. And
Mhm.
I think that that is so like people can have like traditions that can be wrong and can be challenged and should be challenged.
Mhm.
I had one tiny gripe
Mhm. Mhm.
with this. The only gripe I had was that Paku only accepts Katara as
Yeah,
a
I know what you're
student.
gonna say.
Yeah. After he learns that Katara is the granddaughter of the woman that he was betrothed to and that he loved.
Are you
Um
sure?
question mark? Yeah. That's the only thing I didn't like because it just kind of felt that I really wish that Katara finally being accepted as a student could have been clearly out of her own
Mhm.
um her proving herself so explicitly, and it wasn't.
No,
So I was
I had the
yeah.
same gripe. The thing that I tried to justify that with was maybe the authors were trying to say something along the lines of, we have a lot to owe for those who came before us, because we do know
Mhm.
that Gran, like, she left because of these
Right.
nonsensical rules that they
Yes.
had about
Mhm.
women and bending. So I took it as a testament to, we have a lot to owe to these people who have fought for us, and because of
Yeah.
their work and effort, we now have a lot of what we can enjoy because of that.
The other thing I had to say about Katara is that it's just so great the way that they develop her character,
Mhm.
because what we know is that she becomes this like incredibly powerful bender, but I think that really focusing in on her like journey and her like struggles to become the bender that she is also just like really great female representation,
Mhm.
because as a female she has these extra hurdles to jump over to get to where she's at, and the fact that she's able to get there and surpass everyone
Mhm.
is like, she's just such a great character.
Yeah.
She's great.
I
I love
love
her a
that.
lot.
One of the gripes that I find we have a lot with other series is using female characters for the development of
Yes.
of male characters, or the moving forward of the plot. And I don't think
Yeah.
I can think of a single scene of that happening with any main character that plays a very important role. Arguably, you could say that Yue was, but then she even served her
Yeah.
own purpose for the story, right?
But she also had like a greater thematic
Exactly.
purpose. So
But
yeah.
like, I'm just thinking specifically of the Jong Jong episode again, where Aang accidentally
Mhm,
burns Katara. And Katara
mhm.
screams and she's like, ah, I'm hurt. And
Yeah,
Aang immediately
yeah.
feels bad. And then I think that
Mhm.
upon first glean, you can see it as, oh, using Katara for Aang's character development. But then you see
Mhm.
that really her pain is so short lived and it leads directly into the discovery of her healing powers. So if anything,
Yeah,
Katara grows from this incident. So
right.
the use of Katara's pain is more so seen as a consequence of being reckless than it is as
Yeah,
a random catalyst for Aang's character development. And so
right.
I saw that scene and I thought to myself like, wow, this scene could have gone a different way completely, but the writers, it feels like the writers take a lot of care to make it so that that doesn't happen.
She's just great. Like, she's really all these characters, like, even the side characters, everyone just stands on their
Yeah.
own, um, and independently, which is great. And also with UA, like, I think a lot of times when we talk about the Bechdel test and we, like, praise certain, female characters, it's often because, like, "Oh, they're subverting certain expectations for
Uh-huh.
women." UA is, she comes in as a love interest. She's sort of this, like, pretty girl. She's very feminine,
Mhm.
whatever. But she's still also a great character that stands on her own and has a character
Mhm.
arc. And she's not like a badass fighter. She's not a fighter at
Mhm.
all. But but like you still kind of connect with her in her own way. And despite what I said earlier, she isn't completely like this like token romantic
Mhm.
love interest
Mhm.
character just for Sokka. Like she serves a greater purpose to the
Yeah,
story.
for
So
sure. Okay, so that wraps up our Bechtel test. Now for our
yay!
dumpster fire. Okay,
Okay, so now we've just talked about female representation in
yeah,
media. Now
let's
let's just
just
barf.
barf. Okay,
Yeah.
so dumpster fire is the time when we can just literally say whatever we want about anything we
It's
want.
just everything that we haven't already said yet that we're just gonna say right now.
um so okay, so we had talked about the dumpster fire earlier and we said that this dumpster fire is going to be
Mhm.
a little bit different because
Yeah.
there are just some things in life that you hold to such a pedestal that you can't afford to have
I'm
no brain
crying.
cells in regards to it. Like, we can't be too stupid about Avatar because Avatar is not stupid for us. So we have to reciprocate in the appropriate fashion.
But also it's because if you asked me to have no brain cells and be dumb in a discussion about Avatar, I would literally just sit here and go
Sob.
like I wouldn't even form words.
Yeah.
So
Um what are we even gonna talk about? I don't like I have no notes for this section.
I wrote 3 things. I wrote cultural reception, Zutara agenda? Question mark, question mark, question mark? We're not gonna talk about the Zutara agenda because honestly, guys, this episode would get way too long.
Yeah.
I think it's really rare, and maybe especially back in the early thousands to have a kids show that treats kids entertainment with so much maturity and
Mhm.
respect. And by respect, I mean respecting its audience and not expecting the like, oh, it's because it's kids. We have to make it dumb and
Right.
funny. Like there's a lot of real hard hitting themes and in the show. And I think this is not to bash like other types of animated shows that came out around this time like SpongeBob because do not get
Mhm.
me wrong, like I love SpongeBob. We need those shows too. I
Yeah.
have infinite respect for SpongeBob SquarePants. Um and I think he's amazing and great and that show is great in its own way for
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
reasons, but I think that Avatar is special in the way that audiences are looking back at it now realizing that the writing really did hit
Mhm.
different on so many
Mhm.
levels. And I think it just, again, goes back to they set out to write a kids' show, but to treat kids with a lot more intelligently
Mhm.
and to touch upon hard, difficult themes and presenting them in very um, real
Themes
ways.
that I really do truly believe that are
Yeah. and are
are relevant to
relevant to
life.
modern
Yeah, to
society.
life.
Yeah.
Like these are the things that you're going to need to carry with you in order to interact with people, in order to better understand the society that you live in. Um, and then
Yeah.
while they're doing that, they're appreciating different cultures. They're appreciating the beauty of um, different aspects of nature and of
Mhm.
people. It tells human stories, and it's giving us. Oh my gosh, there's just so many things that I can list that this show
It's
does
everything.
well.
And I think writing like a show like this for kids is so much more difficult than trying to write this show for an older audience because you have to really balance like how do we touch upon these themes? How do
Mm-hmm.
we explore this plot point while making it understandable, while making it PG, but also not watering down the like the emotion and like the
Uh-huh.
difficulty of those themes.
Mm-hmm.
It's so difficult. Like I don't know like how I would do that. Like I would have a lot of issues writing for a
Something that
kid's
I just thought
audience.
of right now is all those times in the series where Aang is defeated and he's just saying, I'm just a 12-year-old kid.
Mhm.
But in reality, like,
Exactly.
sometimes kids have to go through difficult things too, right? Like, it's important for
Mhm.
kids who aren't going through the most difficult things to have empathy and to understand those who are. And for those who are
Mhm.
going through difficult times, to realize that, yes, you're seen. We know that life can get hard sometimes. And also, here is somebody that you can relate to and that you can see as an example of how do I deal with difficult situations that sometimes are just too hard for a kid to handle. And these lessons are so
Yeah.
important. Like, I'm very partial to
Mhm.
childhood development, in that
Yeah.
I'm a strong believer that you take what you get from childhood and that stays with you your whole life. And that shapes like the kind
Mhm.
of person you become. And so that's
Yeah.
why I feel such strong emotions about what kids see and what they experience. And so
Mhm.
that's like a personal reason for me why a show like Avatar being out there is such a comfort to me, because I think that not
Yeah.
only is it entertaining, but it also teaches them such important lessons like that.
Yeah, and, like, I think kids, like, they internalize things, like, without
Mm-hmm.
realizing, and sometimes when those experiences are negative, we have to, like Zuko, we have to when we learn things in our childhood and internalize them that we realize later are wrong, we have to go through this very laborious process of unlearning those
Mm-hmm.
things. And that in itself is a very valuable process and a very necessary and difficult one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I guess on just one last note, on
Mhm.
a dumpster fire related note,
Yeah.
why did you give this 16-year-old, this 16-year-old,
Shut
he's
up.
16, don't give him abs. I don't need to see abs on a 16-year-old.
The FBI is on their way as we speak. It is
It
dumpster
is
fire, it is
dumpster
dumpster fire.
fire.
Let us light the
Just
fire.
let me. Let
Um,
me.
I agree with you that again, I watched this as an adult as well, so, like, I had to I'm like, I'm looking
Self-restraint.
that meme that's like, "I'm looking respectfully?"
He's
Yeah,
like our little brother.
I shut up. Um Zuko's character writing, I guess I'm just like very I am
I'm
very
starting to
hesitant
talk about his
to
abs, and this girl goes, Zuko's character writing?
let me continue.
Like, okay, we get it.
No, the point is
I
relevant. Let me
see.
explain. I'm just
Okay, got it. I see.
I hate it here. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
so the reason that I didn't want to make this segment about picking our favorite characters, which is what we usually
Mm-hmm.
do for Dumpster
Mm-hmm.
Fire, is because I love all these characters so much, and I feel like they are so
Mm-hmm.
integral in their own ways that I don't want to pick a favorite character. But with that said, I think I'm very partial to the exploration of morally gray themes and kind
Mm-hmm.
of the internal struggle of like determining what's right and unlearning things. So I think that's why like I feel like Zuko is just a character that a lot of people really relate to because his character growth is crazy
Yeah.
in the show, and then they decided to make him hot. So what am I supposed to do? Like, like what am I supposed to do? I swear my type is 18-year-olds and up. Let me just make that very clear.
Yes.
The other thing is, though, despite all of that, despite us loving Zuko
Mhm.
and loving Katara, we do not love Zutara. And that's my conclusion.
Yeah, please don't ask us any further questions. Thank you.
Please don't ask us. Well, we will not be taking any further questions at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm exercising my Miranda rights, so I have the right to remain silent.
It's our podcast. If we don't want to talk about something, we're not going to talk about it.
But we do want you to know
we are not Zutara shippers.
Yeah.
Yes.
We don't have anything against it. We just have feelings about
We
it.
were
Let's
literally
move on.
like, we don't want to talk about it anymore, and then we kept on talking about it first.
It's because you brought him up. What am I supposed to do? People are gonna think.
Okay. Let's do our ratings.
That got so derailed.
Let's
Let
do our
us
ratings. Okay.
move on.
Yeah.
My rating for Avatar. Surprise, surprise. It was so difficult, guys. My rating for Avatar is going to be 5 out of 5 appas.
Oh, that's so cute. That's a good one.
This is a very easy 5 to give. It feels very liberating to be able to confidently give a show a 5 out of 5. Because honestly, I can't, even if I wanted to, think about a solid critique. And like I said, this show has just transcended like time and space for me. Like I just feel like it is up there with like maybe one or two other pieces of media that just mean so much to me in a way that I can't even begin to explain anymore.
Yeah.
And I just it has that very special factor to me that just gives me the warm fuzzies. And also just objectively, it is great writing and I would recommend it to anyone no matter how old you are. And I chose appas because honestly, even Appa
Great
goes
character
through some
writing.
stuff in this series. He has great character writing. Like honestly, like when we go into Appa's character in season 2, like ooh, that got me crying. That got me crying.
Yeah.
And he deserves love because we didn't even mention him once in this episode. So we need to get. Maybe we did.
I think we should restart the podcast.
I think we should restart the podcast and just talk about Appa. No, I just like love Appa. He's so cute and he's just so cute and big.
Good.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
that's it for me.
5 out of 5 stinky Uncle Iroh sandals.
Oh my god, yes!
When Zuko was like, ugh, this is Iroh's.
Oh my god, yeah, that's so cute.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say. I feel like for the past 2 hours, hour and a half, we've just been talking about why we love this show. And so I really do feel like it does feel liberating to finally be like, yes, this passes the Bechdel test. This is a 5 out of 5. You know, we can finally say that with confidence. A little teaser for the next episode.
Oh,
I feel like that one will also be liberating.
We are really being indulgent here because the next episode is going to be another one of our absolute favorites. Like oh my god, I can't. I have to stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
We have to wrap this up.
My heart is beating fast. Okay. So that brings us to the end of episode 4. Yay. Thank you for listening, for getting this far. We know it wasn't easy, but we appreciate it. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube at The Workshop, Spotify at The Workshop. We're on Apple Music.
Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts, as well as... Wait, is that it? Sorry.
Oh, and follow us on Twitter at Into the Workshop.
And I guess we will catch you guys next time. Bye!
Bye!